Story time of how I caught my grandma and my dad sleeping together. Yes, you heard me right, my dad was sleeping with my grandma. Sadly, I had to be the one to find this out and walk in on them doing the dirty, and it was probably the most traumatizing experience I've ever had. So basically, my dad told my mom that he had to start working late to get extra money, because at the time we weren't doing so good money-wise. So basically, a couple months go by, and my mom said he started acting really weird, and then asked me to keep an eye on him and see if he's doing anything strange. So you know me, the best daughter in the world, kept an eye on him, and I didn't find much out. Until one day, after I came home from school, I got locked out of my house because I didn't have my key, and both of my parents were so called at work. So I told my mom, and she works an hour away, so she couldn't come get me. And so I just had a friend drop me off at my grandma's house. So I tried calling my grandma, but she didn't answer, so I decided I was just gonna go anyways. I go through the back door like I always do, and I wanted to sneak up on her and give her a hug. So I try to be as quiet as I can, and I walk in the room and see my grandma and my dad butt naked on the bed. I'm running out of time. Late for part 2.
Okay, so story time. So basically one time in 5th grade, my dad took me to get breakfast from Dunkin' Donuts. We went there before school like always, and as we were there, this strange man outside was staring at me and making faces. Super creepy. We didn't know him or anything, so we walked inside and I was kind of freaked out. I told my dad that I was creeped out by him, and he told me that nothing bad was gonna happen. Or so he thought. So we got our foods and we ate it. Everything was fine, chill. After we were done, we got up to leave. The man was gone by now, so I felt better. But then on the way to my school, I saw him walking on the sidewalk. I figured he was going to his house or somewhere else. When we got to my school, no one was outside. It was kind of weird. We went to open the door because my dad was a part of the PTA, so he came in with me. The door for some reason was locked. My music teacher out of nowhere ran out and brought us inside quickly. She told us that our whole school was on code red. Scary. And that a man was in our school, so we went inside and I went and hid in the music room. For part 2.
Story time on how/why I slept 3 feet away from my dead neighbor for 6 to 8 weeks during quarantine. Just giving a trigger warning, this story is kind of gross. It was May of 2020 and the pandemic was definitely hitting a peak. Everyone had been at home at this point for the past 2 months and everyone was kind of going crazy, including myself. I lived alone at the time in a 250 square foot studio apartment that was very small in Los Angeles in the Valley. To give perspective for the rest of the story, my building is kind of like an old motel style, so all of our doors open outside, and the building is a rectangle with my door being the only one on the end of the rectangle and 2 doors on either side of me. It was around the middle of May and I started to call my mom and tell her that I wasn't really feeling like myself. And what I meant by that was that I was having headaches, I wasn't really sleeping through the night, I was feeling nauseous a lot, and honestly, we all kind of wrote it off as me just feeling a little lonely and going a little crazy during quarantine just like everyone else was. It was really unlike me to not be able to sleep through the night, so I thought this was really strange, but again, I just kind of wrote it off because I just thought I was really sad and depressed. Throughout the month of May, I noticed that I had an uptick in the amount of bugs in my apartment, which was very unusual because I'm extremely tidy and there's never bugs, but I noticed there was a couple spiders here or there throughout the month, but again, I didn't really think much of it because it was really hot, it was the middle of summer, and sometimes this happens. I started complaining to my manager that I was really sick of the spiders and I needed her to come, but she said she didn't really want to send anyone because it was the pandemic and it wasn't an emergency, and it wasn't like I had a million of them, it was only 2 or 3. Towards the middle of May, I started to complain about a bad smell that I would get whenever there was a heavy breeze, but again, it wasn't anything I could really put my finger on, it was just something that I was smelling occasionally. Truthfully, my best description of this smell was kind of like a dead fish, so I thought that maybe a bird had caught a fish, which in retrospect is the most stupid thing ever because there's no lakes anywhere near me. I started to feel really crazy because, again, I wasn't sleeping, the smell was really starting to bother me, and this was going on for weeks, but my manager was refusing to send anyone out or come out herself because of the pandemic. I started thinking maybe my schizophrenic neighbor who lived to the right of me had his dog had died or something had happened, and I got really worried. But my manager told me she can't just start knocking on neighbors' doors and bothering them, but I had this really bad feeling that something was super wrong and the smell was getting really bad every time it was windy, and I was really worried. But remember, it's the middle of the pandemic and we had been home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so I think I had gotten kind of used to the smell. I called over my boyfriend, he came, and I was super nervous to have him over because of obviously COVID, but he agreed the smell was horrific, he could barely handle it, and then after staying with me for a week, he started to not be able to sleep through the night, he was feeling nauseous and all the same symptoms as me. This is when I started to think something's really wrong. Because my manager said she wouldn't come out, I decided to tell her I was going to call police non-emergency, so they came out and did a wellness check on the neighbor that lived to the right of me who was schizophrenic. Turns out he was perfectly fine and everything was okay. My manager was pretty upset with me because I was disturbing my neighbors, and then they gave me a notice saying that I can't be harassing people in the building. I consulted the police and they told me after 48 hours if my manager didn't convene, then I could call them again. And this is when things got crazy. I felt like I was on a mission because no one was listening to me and my manager was making me out to feel crazy. There's a lot more to this story, so like for part 2. This is part 2 of how/why I slept 3 feet away from my dead neighbor for 6 to 8 weeks during quarantine. I'm gonna give another trigger warning for just grossness overall. Okay, so where we left off was the end of May, and this was the peak of the pandemic, as I mentioned, and this was around the time of George Floyd, which, if you know, in Los Angeles was a very crazy time. There was tanks on the street outside my apartment. It was very hectic, and honestly, me complaining about a smell and some spiders was the last of anyone's concerns, especially the police. I had already called the police once, and they had told me that within 48 hours, if nothing had been done or my manager didn't get involved, then I can call them again and they would escalate the situation. But honestly, it was the last of anyone's concerns. So my manager was quite upset with me for harassing my one neighbor, but I had told her she needed to get involved, and honestly, she wasn't really having it. She agreed to send out our maintenance man to meet me at Wednesday around 3 p.m., but of course, Wednesday at 3 p.m. rolled around and my maintenance man was nowhere to be seen. I decided to give it a couple hours, and sure enough, he showed up, and within minutes of showing up to the building, he had walked up the stairs because I was on the second floor, and remember, our building's a rectangle, my unit is at the end, there's 2 doors on either side of me, and stairs that go straight up. He had walked up the stairs, he couldn't even make it up the stairs without starting to vomit. He ripped off his mask, and he said, "I am going to get the master key, someone is dead." I immediately start freaking out because I felt so validated after weeks and weeks of feeling crazy and complaining and no one believing me. My manager stops answering her phone, the maintenance man literally disappears and never comes back, so I decide I'm calling the police. Things went from 0 to 100 really fast, and honestly I was like the prime suspect in all of this because I had been the only one who was complaining the entire time about this situation. I shouldn't say I was a suspect, I was mostly just the main point of contact for this situation. Within a few minutes, there was 8 cops that were all inside my apartment gathering information, and they said they were just going to start busting down doors. The logical answer was to start with my neighbor who lived to the left of me because we already talked to the neighbor who lived on the right of me, and this is when the most disgusting, craziest thing happened. So the cops gathered the information they need from me, and they decided to start with, logically, the neighbor on the left since they already talked to the neighbor on the right, and they say there's 6 cops, they all have their guns drawn, and they say, okay, LAPD, exit with your hands raised in the air, you've got 30 seconds, we're gonna start counting down. Right before the end of the 30 seconds, one of the cops says, hey, let's draw down our guns, did anybody just try to open the door and see if it's unlocked? And I was like, why would it be unlocked? Brace yourself. So the cop twists the doorknob and he opens it maybe an inch. The amount of bugs that came out of this unit, it looked like 1,000 bugs, thousands of them, flying out of the unit. They immediately slammed the door and the cops called for a ton of backup. The cops started ripping off their masks and multiple of them were throwing up over the side of the railing. I slammed my door and they told me to stay inside and don't come out. Long story short, they said this was the worst decomposed body they had ever come across, and they see a lot of decomposed bodies. Not going to go too into the specifics of it, especially for the privacy of the person, but let's just say they were liquefied and they were basically a skeleton at this point. All the symptoms my boyfriend and I were experiencing were simply because of the fumes and toxins that were releasing from the body and natural gases that were making me extremely sick during pretty much all of quarantine. And that is the story of how I slept 3 feet away from my dead neighbor. Let me know what questions you have in the comments.
Story time about how I fell in love with my stepdad and married him. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I repeat, this is not my story time. My mom and dad divorced when I was 14 years old. This really affected me and I really wanted to move away from my parents. My mom has a tendency to be really controlling and my dad has always been like a really jealous dad. Like he never let me do anything fun or even let me hang out with boys. After they got divorced, I told my parents that I wanted to go to an art school. But not just any art school, this was a boarding school. I was really eager to get away from my parents and just basically have my own life. While I was in this art school, my mom actually remarried. So this guy became my stepdad. My mom told me that she was really in love with him and that everything was perfect. They would come visit me every now and then, so I did meet him a couple of times. Finally, when I was 18, I graduated and went back home. This is where things get really complicated. My mom owned 2 salons and was never home. My stepdad worked from home and was there all day. This meant that I had to spend a lot of time with him. Every now and then, he would ask me to go to dinner and to the movies, just like hang out. And before I knew it, I was developing feelings. Let me remind you again that I was 18. I knew that this was really bad. I mean, this was my mom's husband. But there was something about him I really liked. That's when he started opening up to me about how controlling my mom was in the relationship and how he was actually thinking of leaving her. Now, trust me, when he told me this, I was like, oh my God. But that's when I realized that he probably liked me too. I mean, we hung out all the time. And the vibes were there. I knew I had to get away, so I decided to go study abroad. But my stepdad and I kept in touch. He would email me and text me all the time. And before I knew it, we were talking every single day. One day I get a message from him saying that he caught my mom cheating. Now, honestly, this didn't surprise me because that's why my mom's relationship with my dad ended. He asked me to come home and I did. And when I saw him again, I realized that I actually was falling in love with him. Part 2 is That's when I realized that I had fallen in love with my stepdad. Disclaimers, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I repeat, this is not my story time. At this point, I was 18 years old. He asked me to come home because he found out that my mom was cheating on him. He asked my mom for the divorce and she said yes. Apparently, my mom was actually going to move in with the guy that she was cheating on my stepdad with, which is a whole other story. My stepdad seemed brokenhearted, but at the same time really relieved. And because of this, we actually started spending more and more time together. Once the dust had settled, I decided to go back to school, which was in another country. And the whole time, my ex-stepdad and I kept in contact. We would talk on the phone almost every single day. Finally, when him and my mom were officially divorced, he actually started changing with me. He started going to the gym and even bought himself a new car. Oh yeah, and he got himself a condo. He started sending me selfies of him in the mirror and showing off his abs and stuff like that. At first, I was like, maybe this is innocent, but then I realized that he was definitely flirting with me. On my 20th birthday, I decided to go home and visit my mom. And yes, I knew that I would be seeing my stepdad. My mom and I had dinner and she told me that my stepdad was actually seeing other women. And this made me extremely jealous. My mom noticed it and asked me if I was upset. I said no, but she kept prying. Finally, I confessed to my own mother that I was in love with her ex-husband. Being the drama queen that my mother is, she instantly started to cry and told me that I was trying to ruin her life. She got up from the table and ran out of the restaurant. After that, my mom did not want to take my phone calls. So instead, I went over to my ex-stepdad's house, and I decided to just come out and tell him everything I felt about him. When I finished talking, he actually smiled and hugged me. He told me to just ignore my mom and that everything was going to be fine. He instantly made me feel so much better. And then he told me that he actually had feelings for me too. I mean, I was so happy, but at the same time, I knew that I couldn't be with him because of my mom. I also mentioned to him that my mom said that he was dating a bunch of other women, and he told me that he had been going out on some dates, but that he only ever thought of me. He then asked me if I wanted to give our relationship a shot. I didn't know what else to say except yes, because I was so happy. Then we became boyfriend and girlfriend secretly. Part 3 is up. So my ex-stepdad and I began a secret relationship. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I repeat, this is not my story time. At this point, I was 19 years old, and my ex-stepdad was 47. Since my mom was not speaking to me, I decided to send her an email. And I explained to her that I had every intention to date my ex-stepdad. Finally, a few months later, she called me back. Mind you, my mom had cheated on my ex-stepdad, and that's why they got divorced. And she told me that she would accept the relationship. Then out of nowhere, she told me that I should start planning my wedding. Mind you, I had only been dating my ex-stepdad for a little bit. It feels weird calling him my ex-stepdad, so now I'll just call him my boyfriend. Now the problem is I get judgment from my entire family. My aunts and uncles hate my boyfriend, and I'm pretty sure my mom has been telling them that he's actually a cheater when she was the one that cheated. It's been 2 years now and I'm still with my boyfriend. But he recently asked me if I was open to getting married and I said yes. Now the problem is I don't know what to do about it. We discussed it at length and I basically told him that I think we should elope. He tells me that I'll regret it and that I should have my family there, but I know they hate him. I mean, it is a very weird situation, but they don't understand that I didn't grow up with him. I didn't meet him until I was 18 years old. When my mom found out that we were going to get married, she actually started planning the wedding without my consent. She even tried to pick out my wedding dress and the cake. So 2 weeks ago, my boyfriend and I actually eloped. We're married and literally nobody in my family knows. My mom still thinks she's planning the wedding, and I just don't know how to break it to her that there is no wedding. Should I keep the secret or should I tell my family? I really need help here, thank.
Am I the asshole for refusing to go to a party that was planned for me? Like most women, I had spent years fantasizing about my wedding day. So when my fiance asked me to marry him last year, I was over the moon. I spent hundreds of hours planning and arranging our perfect day. Aww. Little did I know that my fiance and his best man had arranged a prank. So when it came down to anyone objecting the wedding, the best man stood up and says he objected. Anyone who knows anything about weddings knows that regardless if it was a joke or not, the wedding cannot go forward if objected. So despite the best man and my fiance saying that it was a prank, we could not get married yesterday as intended. I was devastated, as all that money was now out the window and non-refundable.
Oh, no.
My soon-to-be sister-in-law had arranged an after-party at her place for us. Instead of me going, I walked down the aisle to the door by myself and took off from complete embarrassment and